Hi, thank you for joining me. I'm going to discuss today our road to continuous improvement at General Motors with a design thinking case study. First of all, to introduce myself, I'm Sally Vlietstra, and I have been with General Motors for a number of years and in various roles. The current role that I'm in with our Center of Learning team, we manage the dealer training and field training for our network. I've been with this group for 5 or 6 years, and prior to that, I've been out in the field organization calling on our dealers and in various other capacities. Just a little bit of background about General Motors and our Center of Learning team. So we are the group that does all of the training for our dealer network across the U.S. We have approximately 4,300 dealers and 150,000 retail employees within that network. And we span the brands that we represent, which are Chevrolet, Buick, GMC, and Cadillac. We also have GM fleet operations and our customer care and after-sales organization that handles service and parts. So a wide variety of roles within our network and the dealers, and then also our field organization who calls on the dealers. So they will call on them for sales or service parts and help them. They're the liaison between the dealer and the corporate side of General Motors. So from a Center of Learning standpoint, I'll just give a little bit of background about our journey and where we are and where we aspire to go. Our journey really started about 5 or 6 years ago when we realized as a learning organization within General Motors and supporting our dealers in our field, we were pretty efficient and effective in the services that we provided. When people would come and ask us to make training, we would sit down and put together an hour training course for them and get it out to the network. And it was kind of, someone placed an order and we would fulfill it. But we also realized at that time that we wanted to do more. And our more at the time was we wanted to be aligned to our business partners. So we wanted to get more closely aligned with them to understand what their goals were so that we at the Center of Learning could ensure that the training that we're doing supports our dealers and our network. We feel we've made a number of changes within our organization to do that. We've aligned training managers to business, and we've every year have made sure that we sync up with our business to understand what their priorities are, and just executed a number of tactics to support that move to being aligned to our business partners. So really our next move that we wanted to make then is thinking about our learners and their needs. So what can we do to ensure that we're helping the performance and improving the performance of our learners, and our learners in this case being dealer network employees and our field employees. Because a lot of times I'm certain there are other organizations that are similar to ours. When we talk to our business partners and ask them what's important, they have their own priorities and objectives to accomplish, and they may not necessarily take into account the learner and what they need in order to do their job effectively. So sometimes, you think of it, they're telling them how to build the watch instead of how to tell time, which is what they need. So that was our next move that we wanted to make and that we want to make at the Center of Learning. So when we got to this step in the journey, we really started with 2 questions for ourselves. The first one was, how are we doing? And the second one was, could we be better? And if we wanted to ask both questions because if we thought about how we were doing okay. We have product trainers that call on our dealers, and they go from dealer to dealer and deliver product training. And we always get great feedback on the product trainers. The dealers love them and see the value of them and always give great feedback. And our level 1 survey results are good for our web-based training as well. So we felt like we're doing okay. And if we would have stopped there, we probably would not have learned anything beyond that. So we really wanted to go after this. How could we be better? So when we were thinking about the how could we be better part of this, we decided to go with design thinking and getting after how could we be better. And design thinking is really a set of principles for creative problem solving. So just, there are many methods to get after problem solving. It is a method, and it really unlocks the needs and problems, even when users don't know what they need. and then it'll lead to human-centered results. So I like to think of this as there's a saying, it's attributed to Henry Ford, and he may or may not have said it. His saying was, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And to me, that kind of encapsulates design thinking, because it's really getting after the, not necessarily asking them what they want, but understanding them and then coming up with solutions. So a little bit of background, there are 5 phases of design thinking. The first phase is empathize, and that's really learning about the audience. Then defining, and that's truly articulating a problem statement, a concise problem statement. Ideate, coming up with ideas and brainstorming solutions. Building prototypes, or prototyping, coming up with quick prototypes, and then testing those prototypes. It's a pretty linear process, but when you look at it, it can happen in many different forms. You can work part of the way through, have to jump back to empathize, and you can move around in it quite a bit, which, is completely normal for the process. The other thing that comes up is people ask who can use design thinking, and a lot of people think of it as a tool to help build products or make products better, which certainly can be the case. But it's not only that; it can be used for processes and making processes better. So really, anyone can use design thinking in any industry. You can see a number of companies on the slide, and they've all used it. A couple to call out would be Uber, and the whole Uber Eats resulted from design thinking, and Airbnb experiences also resulted from design thinking. So it goes across industries and across products or processes. So I'd like to walk through our case study of design thinking at the Center of Learning. We had this, as I mentioned before, the idea of how could we be better? So we thought, let's go after design thinking. And in our step, we started with planning, which would make sense. We spent a little bit of time in the planning phase because we wanted to make sure that we got this right. And I would suggest if you're doing design thinking or want to try design thinking, you spend some time as well with the planning phase of it. And to us, it was important to identify the design thinking team. We had a number of people, and what we did is we tried to use people from various backgrounds. Backgrounds and experiences. So we had people that knew design thinking, and we had people that had never heard of it before. So we varied our team based on their experiences with design thinking, their knowledge of training, their knowledge of dealerships. And my suggestion would be to just get a diverse group of people if you're thinking about a design thinking team. The next phase for our planning would be identifying the users. And in our terms, the users were dealership employees and specific roles within the dealer. Within a dealership, there could be 30 or so roles, and we knew that we didn't want to span across all of them. So we picked out specific roles that we wanted to talk to. And then we use data to uncover the right users. As you can imagine, we have 4 brands and 5 regions within the U.S. We wanted to, and we have small dealers and large dealers, dealer groups, and some that just own one dealership. So we wanted to make sure that we spanned all of those demographics and got the right users for us. And then the next thing from a planning phase that I would recommend is just getting buy-in from the user's manager. So if you're going to go out and talk to people, make sure that you talk to their leaders first and make sure they understand what you're doing. Because in our case, if we would show up at a dealership and just start interviewing employees, there would be questions that would be raised. And I can imagine in a corporate setting, it would be the same thing if someone just showed up at someone's desk and started asking questions. So making sure that there's buy-in from leadership is also important. So that was our planning phase. And just from a timing perspective, that was probably, it took us maybe about a week to put together what that plan was and reach out to people and contact them. So the next phase then we're really getting into is the empathize step in the process. So, and that's learning about the audience. So from an empathy, that's the capacity to understand or feel what another person is experiencing, and really using an empathy or a process to getting at empathy can help remove any of your own bias. From our perspective, you know, like myself or people on my team, we've called on dealerships before. So you think, oh no, they're going to say these things, or they'll react this way, or we could never do that because they won't buy into it. So going after empathy phase and really using a structured process can remove some of those biases and get to the true voice of the customer. There are three approaches that you can try with empathy. One is to try it yourself, so to do it yourself and experience it. Another is to observe. And then the third is to ask questions. And in our case, we did observation and ask questions. It would be, for us, it would be difficult to go in and practice, you know, sell cars at a dealership without experience. So observing and talking to people were our methods that we chose. When we put together, so we identified our interview team, and we put together just a plan or a worksheet, if you will, of questions. And this is really to help our interviewers for the empathy stage practice a little bit and get used to asking open-ended questions. So at the Center of Learning, we have the luxury of working in a building that is open to the public. So our people went and did a little bit of practice on internally using the empathy interview sheet, and then they practice out in our public area asking questions and got a little bit of practice before they went out to dealerships. So for us, as I mentioned, we're across the U.S. We did pick across locations in each of our 5 regions to make sure that we had covered all of our regions. We held 75 interviews, and then the roles that we interviewed were business development centers, BDCs, service advisors, sales consultants, and sales managers. Those are the audiences that we selected for our interviews. So when we went out, we broke this into a 4-box format. And we were asking, when we interviewed people, who am I? What are the motivations and goals? What are some key quotes? And then their pain points. And this structure really helped organize the interviews and capture feedback. It was a great tool for really learning, gathering all this information about people. And you can use any tool that works for you to gather the information. The thing that was very valuable for us, and I would suggest that if you're doing something with a 4-box formula in there, that you can change them around, that's fine. But the key quotes were really helpful for us because it just helps encapsulate the sentiments of people when you can say, well, I talked to these people and they said this specifically. So we found those key quotes very valuable for us. So that was our empathy phase, and that we did in about a week. So we had teams of people. Each of them went to a different region, flew out on a Monday, did a couple of days of interview, and then flew back later that week. And then the next phase then that we went into was define. And so define is finding meaningful and actionable problem statements. So the way to do this is to really unpack all those empathy interviews and then kind of group them into needs and insights. And then from there, once you have your findings, scope problem statements, problems and needs statements, and then develop a point of view for the user. So we did that the following week, and you can see our format was a lot of sticky notes on papers and then walking through those and categorizing them into areas to just get to common themes of feedback and that we receive from our participants. So we unpacked all that information, grouped it into common themes, and we came up with learning personas. So first we started with all those individual interviews in the 4-box formula or tool, and then we really honed them down into learning personas for the 4 roles that we were interested in. And this is really highlighting key insights and things that we learned from those learners. For us, we had 6 key themes that emerged. The first was the feedback that we received was understanding people is critical to success, and that our learners wanted soft skills training in order to be successful in their role. Also, they needed inspiration and support to stay motivated. When you think of sales, that's, commission-based. They get a lot of no's as they're selling, so they needed support to stay motivated in their roles. And they want training that is personalized. So some people are brand new to the industry. Some have moved from other dealerships and have a little bit of background and know some things. They wanted to have training that was personalized and took into account their background and experiences. They also wanted flexibility to learn what they wanted, but with structure. So they didn't want an open slate of just saying, take 40 hours of training, pick what you want. They wanted some structure around it, but they also wanted flexibility. They preferred hands-on and interactive learning. Specifically, when you think of sales or service roles, there is product information that they need to know, but they find it useful experiential training about the interactions with customers. And then lastly, time spent training is time away from selling. So they are commission-based, and a lot of them see training as I go to the back room and I complete my tests, and then I go out and I do my real job. And they felt that whenever they were training, it was time away from their job. So that was a lot of themes, and we knew that we couldn't get after them all right away. So we picked 2. The 2 that we picked are the hands-on and interactive learning, and then time spent training is time away from selling. We landed on these because we kind of voted amongst ourselves, and we felt that these were the ones where we could make the most impact in the quickest fashion. There were other ones on there too, like the selling skills, and you may find this in your design thinking as you're going and identifying themes, that like the selling skills, we knew what we could do there. Like we didn't need to go through a design thinking process to go after soft skills and selling skills. So we had a team that just took that and ran with it. So the 2 that we are using for use for design thinking were hands-on interactive learning, and then time spent training is time away from selling. So thinking of that, we came up with a problem. I need to learn from experience so I can apply as I learn, and turn that into a how might we statement. And we had 2 how might we statements. So thinking of your problem, the how might we give learners experiential ways to learn on their own? And then how might we enable people to learn from others on the job? And then our second problem statement is time training is time away from selling. We turn that into 2 how might we statements. How might we change the perception of what training means? And how might we provide training that doesn't take them away from their job? So that was defining our problem statement. The next area, so we had these problem statements, and I would say the problem statement and phase was probably between unpacking all the information and then getting to problem statements. That was a couple of days of activity from the group that had gone out and did the interviews. So next we went to Ideate. And that's brainstorming and creating solutions. So Ideate is the art of the possible, and is not coming up with one idea, but coming up with the most range of ideas that you can think of. And I like to, there's a book that's called The Originals or Originals by Adam Grant. And because a lot of times you think of people that come up with original ideas, they have this brilliant idea and then they just, they take that idea and run with it. And his book suggests that people that have these brilliant ideas have a lot of ideas and one of them happens to work. So design thinking kind of follows suit with that. And the idea is that at first you're going broad to get the empathy, and you focus and all the ideas that are possible that you can come up with. So our ideation process, you can again use any process that works for you. Our ideation process really started with idea sharing in smaller groups, sketching and storyboarding out those ideas, voting on them, and then prioritizing them on a matrix of impact compared to feasibility. So how that looked for us was Ideate. We broke into these for idea sharing, smaller groups, had our problem statements, and just started coming up with ideas and capturing them all. We then went to storyboard or sketch them out, and it was important for us to use pictures and sketching them out to tell the story as opposed to putting words on paper. It just made it more visual for people to get an idea of what we were talking about. So we sketched them out. Then the groups all shared their ideas amongst the groups, and we voted. So we voted for categories that were doable, wild cards, or they could be disruptive. And the other thing here is, like, if you think of a storyboard, one story might have a lot of elements to it. We voted on the elements, not necessarily just the entire story, because you might like a portion of an idea, but not the whole idea. So we broke it down into sections and voted on the pieces of the ideas. So then after that, we went to a prioritization matrix, and it's really what is the level of impact, low or high, and what is the feasibility of it actually happening, low or high. And obviously, if it's low impact, low feasibility, things that you probably don't want to get after right away. But if it's high impact and would be a little bit easier to implement, that's great. So we had some big bets, stars, quick hits, and lower priorities. And our ideas mostly fell into big bets, stars, and quick hits. And so that was our, just flip back here, that was our session on ideating. And that, just from a timing perspective, if you're thinking about how this would work for you, it was a day and a half of workshop. We thought we could get it done in a day, but it took us a little bit longer. So it was really getting the groups together, coming up with ideas, and then voting on them right away. And you don't want to spread that out over a long time because you can forget what the ideas are and have to a little bit start over. Okay. So prototype. The prototype is obviously building a sample of your idea and seeing how it would look. And it's a representation of your idea. You can really go after low fidelity or high fidelity prototypes. Just a couple of examples. Low fidelity is really just maybe mocking something up on pen and paper and, drawing pictures of things or taking snapshots of things that might work. And high fidelity, or here's another low fidelity example for the iWatch, was just basically taking an iPhone and strapping it to your wrist to see how would that work for you. High fidelity things are, going after computerized things, applications, that type of thing. Obviously, the high fidelity, if it takes a long time to make, it would be, it slows down your process. And one of the things with design thinking is to move quickly through these steps and just see, is it feasible without spending a ton of time there. So, those are your options to go low fidelity, high fidelity. So one of the solutions that we came up with, our ideas that we wanted to go after, was the idea of Sell Like We Do. So a social learning. And this is in the category of how might we give learners experiential ways to learn on their own. So thinking of social learning, how could they learn from each other? And we picked a very low fidelity platform for it, which is Facebook. It's a tool that already exists and people know how to use it. So it was, and it's quick to do. So we developed a Facebook page. The next one was the idea of, we called it Mobile Molly. It's a chatbot, and how might we provide learning that doesn't take them away from the job. So if you think of a chatbot, it's on the phone and they can do it pretty much anywhere. And the idea was that they could take this with them, or it could be with them, out on the sales floor or in service department, and they could learn as they were on the job. And this one is another tool. There are platforms out there, so it wasn't a large investment of time or energy to create something. We found a platform that was out there and available. So that was our chatbot. And then the third one we called Video Vents, and that's virtual feedback and a coaching tool. And the problem statement was helping is how might we enable people to learn from others on the job. And now we found another tool that already existed that we could pilot with and put together a quick pilot for Video Vents. So each of these pilots took, a day a piece to set up. Once we landed on the tool, they weren't overly intensive for a creation standpoint. There are things that we could put together quite quickly. So then next, after prototype phase, we went to testing. So we found some projects that we could test these on and moved into that, into the testing stage. So I would say that you prototype like you're right, and then test as if you think you're wrong on it. So really try and break it. It's great to have create authentic experiences for users to test the prototypes, and then you can refine and test again, and just keep refining your work. So Sell Like We Do was our social tool with Facebook. We put together, as I mentioned, a Facebook page and got it out there rather quickly. And we've seen some good success with that. A little bit slow up front, and that was really getting people onto it and aware that the site was out there. But we've seen a steady gain in users, and it's really helped us from a sense of social learning, that they could learn from each other. We first had a moderator that added a lot of content to it, but after we started getting a critical mass of people out there, it's pretty self-sustained and a good source. Especially, there's a lot of times new people will join in, and the group is very welcoming to them and offers solutions. So some good success with that one. Mobile Molly was our chatbot, and we put together the chatbot. We tested this with two kind of paths. One was a shorter duration and every day, and another one was over. So the first one was like 2 weeks long, and the second one was 4 weeks long. The second one that was longer, they had more time between the chats, and we wanted to see which would work better and which would be better received by our learners. We had some really good success with this, and we have used it again since. There's a 74% of participants stayed active through about 75% of the chats, and the high engagement lasted for about 9 days on that one. The overall experience, we did learn a couple of things. One is they do not want to be texted on Sunday or hours that they're not working. So we did make some adjustments on that right away after we realized that the chats were going out on the weekends. But we have net promoter scores, and they were well received from a learner perspective, and we saw good results. We did see better results for the shorter duration that was every day, and that's the one that we have continued to pursue. A net promoter score of 69%, which we consider to be good, and then again, no Sunday text is another item that we learned. Next one, the chatbot prototype observation. So a couple of things I was just mentioned, if you're thinking about if chatbots could work for you, they liked it and they were engaged with it. The product trainers, so I mentioned before, we have product trainers that call on dealers. Those product trainers greatly influence the participation. So they would go into dealers and say, we have this thing, and help them get signed up. And then that increased our participation. You could tell when trainers weren't maybe as supportive of the tool, that they didn't get as many signups as the others. More intense, shorter cycle was preferred, as I mentioned, the chat during working hours only. And then this chatbot is a way to reinforce learning. It's not necessarily a way that you would teach something for the first time, but for us, certainly after a product trainer goes in and talks about a product, it's a great way to build lasting knowledge by repetition and spacing. Video events was our third prototype that we tried, and this is a virtual feedback and coaching. So we put together a video events, and we did not have much success with it. First of all, we were planning this, we were in the room, and people were like, well, people are used to, being on video all the time. There's FaceTime and chatting and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. People use video all the time. But we found they probably do that in their personal lives, but from a professional experience, they weren't interested necessarily in capturing themselves on video and then sharing it with a bunch of people. So we did not have much success with that. Interestingly enough, for our field organization, we have a district manager role that we do training for, and they're typically new to GM, younger in their career typically, and they don't have experience one way or another with working with a video tool in a professional setting. So in our DM training, we do have them record themselves once a week at the end of the week and submit videos, and they do it without problem because they don't know any different. That's just been always a part of their training. So I guess the lesson in this one is to really understand your audience and when it might be applicable or not applicable. So for us, those were our three tests, and our journey continues in 2018 is when we did our design thinking and voice of the customer. Last year, we really spent a lot of time trying out ideas and going after some key themes around personalization, understanding modalities for deliverables, what social learning can be, what types of recognition work for us, manager support, how to get that, and then feedback as well. So we spent a lot of time with that last year. And then this year is really for upskilling our own selves and our talent to make sure we understand the tools that are available and our learners and our business partners, going after technology and process improvement. And then 2021, really having a culture that embraces learning and performance improvement. So some lessons learned for us, we have a number of lessons learned. I would say take notes on the experience of the interview. So making sure that you capture a lot of notes on the interviews to learn, to go back to. And we've actually, beyond 2018, have set up empathy interviews again with people, not the fly out to every location, but just getting on the phone with groups of people and listening to what they say, because it is a great source of feedback for the organization. So making sure that you take notes. Empathy and customer interviews take planning. It's not as easy as just showing up at a location and starting asking questions. You really have to think about who your audience is and how you want to pursue it to get the right people and the right questions. Dedicated resources. If you have resources that you can dedicate to design thinking, that's great. We have some people that were dedicated to it for short spurts of time, so it's not their full-time job of all year, every week. But over the time that we were working on this, they did dedicate their time to design thinking. So there's a core group that were dedicated to it, and others that kind of filtered in and out. Create a place to continue foster design thinking. So we have ourselves an we call it the innovation garage, where we continue to talk about what new ideas are out there and what trends, and just keeping ideas fresh for our organization. Avoiding yes and no questions, and then also trying to get rid of that bias or negative voice. It's so easy, especially if you've been in learning for a while, to just say, oh, we've tried that before, or I know what they're going to say. Just really letting the empathy interviews and the people who are being interviewed express their thoughts and ideas. These things are meant to be quick from a design thinking perspective. As I mentioned, there was none of the activities across the 5 areas of design thinking were more than a week long. So really getting after these things quickly and trying not to spread it out over a great amount of time, because you kind of lose momentum that way. And then the other thing I would just mention is design thinking is not the solution for everything. I mentioned even when we came up with our themes, there were some of them we just knew that we could go after without having to do a lot of prototyping or testing. So just, use it when appropriate and for certain projects. So thinking about this from just an overall perspective of learning, design thinking applications, some ideas that you might want to start with, or we could start with, is how might we improve the learner experience? Thinking of your organization, where are areas that you want to improve the learner experience? How can we attract and retain new talent? I think people are typically looking for new talent and making sure that we retain them. So how can we do that through design thinking? Be better business partners. We went through a transformation to become better business partners for our business partners, and really thinking about how could we do that from a design thinking perspective. Improve employee experience and engagement. So how can we improve employee engagement? And then how to create a culture to empower creativity, collaboration, and innovation. Those are all great topics to think about as you think about design thinking. So for us, it really started with 2 questions. How are we doing? And could we be better? And we found out that we could be better, and we could be better by looking at ourselves and applying design thinking, and then going after some of these new and innovative tools and trying out new things. I'd like to thank you very much for your time today. I appreciate joining you, and I hope that you found some useful information and you'll consider giving design thinking a try within your organization. Thank you.